5 years, one lie, and a badge that finally said my name. My name is Iris Bennett. I'm 34 years old. Last month, my sister was wheeled into my emergency department on a backboard. And my mother didn't recognize the doctor walking toward her. She was too busy begging that doctor to save her daughter. She had no idea she was begging me. To understand why my mom grabbed my dad's arm hard enough to leave bruises that night, you have to go back 5 years. To the lie my sister told. The call that ended everything. And the part none of them ever knew I'd already become. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel for the quiet ones who finally get heard. Stories about boundaries, betrayal, and the moment the truth walks through the door on its own 2 feet. If you've ever been the person nobody believed, stay with me to the end. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The night it happened. The night my sister came in, I had already run 2 codes and a stabbing. That's a slow Tuesday for me. People picture an ER as chaos. But a good one runs on the opposite of chaos. In my department, panic is the only thing we don't allow in the room. I learned that habit a long time before medical school. I was an EMT at 19. Hauling gurneys up icy porch steps in the dark. I worked 3 years as a research tech after that, washing glassware and learning to keep my hands steady when everything around me wasn't. I started medical school at 26. Older than most of my class. Student loans stacked to the ceiling. No safety net behind me. Nobody handed me any of it. I took 30-hour shifts and a second job and a quiet kind of stubbornness. And I built a life 1 brick at a time. The staff that night moved around me like a current finding its banks. Ranata, my charge nurse, called out beds without looking up. A resident asked me about a potassium level. I answered before the question finished. I love that feeling. Being exactly where my hands know what to do. What people never guessed about me. Watching me run a trauma bay so calmly is where I first learned to stay calm. It wasn't here. It was at home. At a kitchen table in a house where losing your composure meant losing your place. I'll get to that. For now, just know this. By the time the worst night of my family's life arrived, I was very, very good at not flinching. The 2 daughters. There were 2 daughters in the Bennett house. And only one of them was ever the project. My sister Dana is 3 years older than me. She was the bright one. The fragile one. The one whose mood set the family weather. When Dana struggled, the whole house mobilized. When Dana dropped out of college her sophomore year, my parents framed it as a brave choice to find herself. She found herself back in her childhood bedroom. And they paid for the search. I was the other one. I was the daughter who fixed things. I balanced the household checkbook at 15, because my mother said numbers gave her headaches. I talked the cable company down twice. I covered Dana's overdraft fees more than once and never mentioned it. When I got into a science magnet program, my mother's response was, "Dana needs us more than you do, Iris. You've always been fine." She said it the way you'd remark on the weather. I think that was the moment I understood the rules. In my family, being fine was not a compliment. It was a permission slip. It meant you could be left at the curb. Skipped over. Handed the bill. Because surely you'd manage. You always did. I learned to manage so well that nobody ever asked if managing was costing me anything. It was. I just paid it quietly. The way I paid Dana's overdrafts. The trouble with being the strong one is simple. People stop checking whether you're still standing. They only notice when you finally sit down. The research year. The summer before my 4th year of medical school, I won a funded research year. A real prize. The kind that opens doors. It also meant 14-hour days in a lab 2 states away. Running experiments that didn't care what time it was. I went quiet that year. Not by choice exactly. By physics. There were weeks I slept at the bench and forgot to charge my phone. My family already lived on the edge of my attention. And that year, I let the edge get thin. I made one decision I'd come to regret. I asked Dana to pass along my news. Just tell Mom and Dad I'm heads down in research. I told her. I'll call when I surface. It felt like a kindness. Dana loved being the hub. The one who knew things first. I handed her the role gladly. Because handing Dana things had been my job since I was small. I thought I was giving my sister a gift. I was handing her a key. and I gave it to the one person who'd been waiting her whole life for a door she could lock behind me. I didn't know that yet. I was busy. I was happy in the bone-tired way you get when work is hard and good. I'd call home every few weeks and hear my mother sound oddly clipped, my father oddly silent. And I'd chalk it up to my own distraction. People who are drowning rarely notice the shore moving away. They think the problem is the water. The white coat ceremony. Before the research year, there was the white coat ceremony. It's a small ritual that means everything to a medical student. You walk across a stage. Someone slides a short white coat onto your shoulders. And for the first time, a stranger pins a badge to your chest with your name on it. Mine was a flimsy laminated student ID. Iris, medical student. I held it that morning like it was made of gold. I remember thinking, one day this will say doctor. I bought 2 extra tickets for the family seating. I drove out at 6 a.m. to set programs on the 2 seats I'd saved. 3rd row on the aisle. So my parents wouldn't have to climb over anyone. My mother had told me Dana wasn't feeling well. But I told myself they'd come anyway. They didn't. I walked across that stage and looked out at 2 empty chairs with my parents' names written on folded cards. And a stranger pinned my badge to my coat. And I smiled because that's what you do. Afterward, I sat down in one of those empty chairs and ate the cafeteria sandwich I'd packed. Alone. In a borrowed white coat. Here's the part that matters. I didn't fall apart. I finished my sandwich, drove back to the library, and studied until the building closed. 2 empty chairs. I told myself it was just one ceremony. I told myself a lot of things that year. And most of them were ways of not counting how many seats my family kept choosing not to fill. People assume the quiet daughter is the soft one. They're usually wrong. The loan. The spring before everything broke, Dana called me with a familiar tightness in her voice. She wanted me to co-sign a loan. $11,000, she said. Just to consolidate some cards. Just temporarily. Just until she got back on her feet. I'd heard every version of that sentence for 15 years. I was a medical student living on loans and ramen. And I knew exactly what co-signing meant. It meant my name on her debt. And my credit in her hands. I said no. Not cruel. I said, I love you, and I'll help you build a plan. But I won't sign my name to your bill. There was a silence on the line that I now understand was a door closing. You think you're better than us, Dana said. You always have. I told her that wasn't true. That wanting a boundary isn't the same as wanting distance. She hung up. I sat there feeling like the villain in a story I hadn't agreed to be in. I want you to remember this moment. Because it's the hinge the whole thing swings on. I said no to my sister about money exactly once. Gently. With an offer to help attached. 3 weeks later, she would pick up the phone and rewrite me into someone my parents could finally throw away. I didn't see it coming. But the fuse, the real one, was lit the night I kept my name off her loan and refused to apologize for it. The call that ended me. I wasn't there for the phone call that ended me. I pieced it together later. The way you reconstruct an accident from the skid marks. While I was running gels at 2 in the morning, my sister was running a story. Dana called our parents crying. Not performing crying, she's better than that. She built it slow. She said she was worried about me. She said I'd stopped answering because I was ashamed. She said, and this is the part that took my breath away when I finally learned it, that I dropped out of medical school months ago and had been lying to everyone. That the research year was a cover story. That I was living with a man who used. Dana controlled the family group chat. She always had. She was the one who screenshotted and forwarded and summarized. So when she wanted proof, she made proof. A message of mine about being exhausted, cropped to look like despair. A photo of a friend's apartment captioned to suggest the worst. My own words trimmed into a confession I never made. And the line she gave my parents, the one she'd repeat for 5 years like a woman polishing a medal, was this. Somebody in this family had to tell them the truth. She said it so often that she came to believe it. That's the thing about a good liar. The lie isn't the dangerous part. The dangerous part is when they start needing it to be true. The verdict. My father called me on a Sunday. One call. He'd put my mother on speaker. I could hear her breathing sharp and ready. I thought maybe something was wrong. Maybe someone was sick. I said, Dad, is everyone okay? He didn't ask me a single question. That's what I remember most. He had already held the trial, reached the verdict, and called only to read the sentence. We know about the dropout, he said. We know you've been lying to this family for a year. I actually laughed because it was so absurd. Dad, I'm in a research lab. I can send you the dean's letter right now. I started reading him the program name, the grant number, anything. My mother cut in. Dana would never lie about something like this. 11 words. They told me everything about where I stood. I kept talking. I said I'd email the documents, drive home, do whatever they needed. But the more proof I offered, the angrier they got. Because the proof was inconvenient to a story they'd already decided to love. My father's voice went flat and final. Don't call home until you're ashamed. Then the line went dead. I sat in the lab stairwell with my phone in my hand, and a dean's letter in my inbox, and no one on earth who wanted to read it. I had the truth. They had a story they liked better, and a daughter willing to keep feeding it. That night, I finally understood why I'd spent my whole childhood learning to stay calm at the kitchen table. The table was never safe. I'd just been too young to say so, trying to solve it. I'm a person who believes problems have solutions. So for a while I tried to solve this one. I emailed my parents the dean's verification letter. No reply. I printed it. Wrote a calm 2-page explanation by hand. Mailed it. My mother sent it back unopened. Returned to sender in her tidy cursive. I called my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister, the one relative who'd ever looked at me like I was a whole person. Carol believed me instantly, because Carol had watched the favoritism for 40 years and knew its shape. She tried to mediate. She told my mother she'd seen my transcripts. My mother told Carol she was being manipulated by me. Everything I sent the family flowed through Dana first. And Dana edited the river. A letter became a rumor. A document became, Iris is harassing us. I was talking to people who could only hear me through the one person who'd built her whole position on me staying unheard. Carol called me one evening, tired, and said the truest thing anyone said that year. They don't want the truth, sweetheart. They want to be right. I wrote it on a sticky note and put it on my bathroom mirror. I looked at it every morning while I brushed my teeth, learning it slowly. The way you learn to live with a scar. Some doors don't open no matter how politely you knock. The hardest lesson of my 20s was figuring out which doors those were, and when to stop bloodying my knuckles against them. The decision. That winter, I made a decision. And I want to be clear that it was a decision and not a collapse. I stopped explaining myself. I closed the laptop on the unsent emails. I took the sticky note off the mirror. Not because I'd given up, but because I'd finally learned what it said. You cannot argue someone out of a story they need to believe. So I stopped trying. And I poured every ounce of that energy somewhere it would actually grow. Into the work. I aced my boards. I matched into emergency medicine. I treated the lab and the wards like the family I'd been told I didn't have. I stopped grieving the people who'd left and started building with the people who stayed. If you've ever had to prove you were a good person to someone who kept the receipts hidden, you already know the exact weight of this kind of silence. It isn't surrender. It's strategy. Comment I know if you've carried it. And subscribe because I promise you the door swings the other way later. And you'll want to be here when it does. The strange gift of being thrown away is that you stop performing for the people who threw you. I went quiet. My family mistook it for surrender. It was the sound of someone finally putting down a weight she'd been told was hers to carry, and walking off to build a life with her hands free. Residency. Residency is where I became myself. Emergency medicine is 3 years of being handed the worst night of strangers' lives and learning to make it better. It suited me. It turns out the kid who kept the family calm at the kitchen table grows into a doctor who keeps the room calm when the monitors scream. I worked under a program director named Dr. Helen Brandt, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and 0 patience for excuses. Helen saw me. She pushed me into procedures, vouched for me, told me once over bad coffee that I had the steadiest hands she'd trained in a decade. I nearly cried into the coffee. Praise was a foreign language, and she spoke it fluently. The first time the overhead system called my name, I was a second-year resident. The speaker crackled and said, "Dr. Bennett to the trauma bay." I stopped in the hallway for one full second and almost looked around for someone else. Because surely they didn't mean me. They meant me. I started walking, and something in my chest stood up straight for the first time in years. My family had spent that year telling each other I was a failure hiding in the dark. Meanwhile, a hospital was paging me by a title I'd earned with my own two hands. I didn't have parents in the audience anymore. I had Helen, and a team, and a name on the overhead. Some nights, that was more family than I'd had in the house I grew up in. Graduation. I graduated residency on a bright June morning in a rented auditorium that smelled like floor wax and lilies. This time, I didn't save anyone's seats. That sounds like a small thing. It was the opposite of small. 3 years earlier, at the white coat ceremony, I'd driven out at dawn to set programs on 2 chairs for parents who never came. This time, I bought exactly the tickets I needed for the people who'd actually show up. Theo, who I'd married by then, and Helen and 2 friends from my class. There happened to be 2 empty chairs at the end of our row anyway, the way there always are at these things. And I caught myself looking at them. For a second, the old reflex twitched, the urge to grieve the absence. Then it passed, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. Not numbness. Peace. I had stopped keeping the seats warm. I didn't save them seats this time. And that was its own kind of graduation. Bigger than the diploma in my hand. Helen leaned over as they called my name and whispered, "Go get it, doctor." I walked across the stage. The dean shook my hand. And somewhere in a town 2 states away, my parents were going about a Saturday with no idea their failure daughter had just become a board-eligible emergency physician. I didn't need them to know. That was the difference 5 years makes. You stop building your life as a message to the people who left, and start building it as a home for the people who stayed. Theo. I met Theo at a fundraiser I didn't want to attend. He teaches high school biology, laughs with his whole face, and has never once tried to fix me. I want to be honest about something, because these stories love to pretend a man saved the heroine. Theo didn't save me. I'd already saved myself by the time he showed up. He just made the rebuilt house warmer. He doesn't have money or status to lend me. He has a teacher's salary and a beat-up Subaru. And a way of saying, you don't owe them anything, that I believed because he never needed me to. We married small, in a botanical garden on a Saturday in October. I didn't invite my parents. I did quietly leave the family table at the reception, set the way tradition says, and there were 2 empty chairs there where parents sit. The photographer caught one shot of that table. The linen perfect. The chairs pushed in. Nobody in them. When the proofs came back, Theo asked if I wanted that photo gone. I said, no. Leave it. It's a fact, not a wound. The wedding gift. Here's a detail I learned the meaning of much later. Dana sent a wedding gift. A nice one. A stand mixer. With a card in her looping hand. So happy for you, little sister. Family is everything. She sent it to our cousins group too, so everyone could see what a loving sister she was. Even in my absence, Dana was managing the story. She'd thrown me out of the family and still wanted credit for being its heart. I put the mixer in a closet. And didn't write back. The screenshots. About a year ago, Aunt Carol called me on a Tuesday. She said she had something to send me, and that I could do whatever I wanted with it. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a folder of screenshots. They were the original family group chat from 5 years before. The real one. Before Dana cropped and curated it for my parents. Carol had been added to that chat for a single week, to coordinate a relative's funeral, and her phone had quietly backed up everything. I sat at my kitchen table and read it all once. Start to finish. There it was in timestamps. My actual message. Heads down in research this year. I'll surface in spring. Love you guys. Dana's reply to me, warm and normal. And then, in a separate thread to our parents that Carol had also captured, Dana building the other story. Brick by brick. I think Iris is in trouble. I don't want to scare you. But she made me promise not to tell. Watching a lie get assembled is a strange thing. It's so ordinary. It's just a person typing. choosing each word to land. I understood, reading it, that my parents had been handed the truth and the lie at the same time, and had reached past the truth to grab the version that confirmed what they already felt about me. I had the whole story now in my hands, forwardable to anyone. And I closed the laptop. I didn't send it to a single relative. I didn't post it. Knowing was enough. I'd spent 5 years learning that being right and being believed are different things, and that you can hold one without ever getting the other. So I held it quietly, and I went back to work, carrying a truth I had decided, all on my own, that I would never need to prove. The badge. The badge came in the mail in a stiff cardboard envelope, the way the most important things sometimes do. I'd finished residency, passed my boards, and signed on as an attending at Scioto General in Columbus. I opened the envelope at my kitchen counter, and there it was, heavier than the laminated student ID I'd held a lifetime ago. Iris MD, Emergency Medicine. I held it the same way I'd held the first one, but the weight had changed, and so had I. 6 months later, they made me assistant medical director of the department, and a new badge arrived with the title added underneath my name. I clipped it to my scrubs and looked at myself in the locker room mirror, and thought about a folded program on an empty chair. One day this will say doctor, I told myself. It said more than that now. It said I was the one who built the schedule, the one who ran the room, the one residents got paged to back up. The girl who'd been told to call home only when she was ashamed had become a person other people called when everything was on fire. I didn't feel triumphant about it exactly. I felt steady. I'd stopped needing the badge to mean something to my family. It meant something to me. And to the patients who'd never know my name, but would walk out alive because of the steadiness I'd learned at a kitchen table, where it was never safe to fall apart. That's the quiet revenge nobody films. You become exactly who they swore you'd never be. And you do it without them watching. The 5 years. While I was building, the house was holding still. I knew the broad strokes from Aunt Carol, who'd kept one careful foot in both worlds for my sake. Dana never did get back on her feet. The loan I wouldn't co-sign got signed by my parents instead. And then another after it. And the money flowed the way it always had, toward the daughter who needed it, away from the daughter who managed. Dana moved back home for a stretch. Then out. Then back. She drove a lot for a delivery app to make rent. Long shifts. Tired hours. The kind of driving that catches up with a person. My mother defended her through all of it. Carol told me that at a family dinner, my mother had said lightly over the green beans, "At least Dana never abandoned us." I let that sit in my chest for a while. The daughter who'd lied them into cutting me off was the loyal one. The daughter who'd been thrown away was the abandoner. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a system. And the system needed me to be the villain so that everyone else could keep their roles. I didn't argue with it anymore. I'd learned that you can't reason with a story that's doing a job for the people telling it. So I lived my life. 2 states and 1 universe away. Ran my department. Came home to Theo. And let the Bennetts keep the version of me they preferred. I thought that was the end of it. I really did. I'd made my peace with never seeing them again. The universe, it turns out, had a different appointment on the calendar. The Tuesday in March. It was a Tuesday in March. A little after 9 at night. And I was the attending running the board. We'd cleared the early rush. I was charting at the station with a lukewarm coffee when Ranata, my charge nurse, pressed a hand to her earpiece and looked up. "Heads up," she said. "Medics calling in a multi-vehicle on the interstate. 3 coming. 1 critical." I did what I always do. I called it out. Assigned beds. Made sure trauma surgery had a warning, and the blood bank was awake. This is the part of the job that feels like conducting. You set the room before the music starts. The ambulance bay doors are big and red, and they swallow a lot of light when they open. I stood near them, gloves half on, listening to the radio chatter resolve into the shape of the night ahead. ETA 4 minutes. Abdominal trauma. Hypotensive. Restrained driver. Single vehicle off the original collision. The board filled with the placeholders we used before names come in. And then a unit secretary, taking a call from the field, typed the critical patient's name into the trauma slot so the system could pull a chart. I glanced at the screen the way I'd glanced at it 10,000 times. The name sat there in plain hospital font. White letters on blue. Bennett, D. I had no idea, as those red doors began to part, that the next gurney through them would be carrying my entire childhood. The doors opened and the medics rolled her in fast, talking over each other in the clipped shorthand of people doing CPR-adjacent math in their heads. Female, late 30s, restrained driver, single vehicle rollover. Hypotensive in the field. Rigid abdomen. I stepped to the head of the gurney before I'd let myself finish the thought my eyes had already finished. It was Dana. Older. Thinner. A gash above one eyebrow. But unmistakably my sister. The bright, fragile one whose moods had once been the family weather. For exactly 1 second, I was 13 again at the kitchen table, bracing for the storm. Then the overhead crackled and said, "Trauma activation Bay 1. Dr. Bennett." And the second was over. I chose the attending. I had a choice in that second, and I want you to know I made it on purpose. I could have been the abandoned little sister. Instead, I was the only board-certified emergency physician standing between Dana and the worst outcome. And that's a different kind of person entirely. "Move her on my count," I said. My voice came out level. Clinical. Exactly the voice Helen had trained. The team didn't know the woman on the table shared my last name. They just heard their attending take command. Dana's eyes fluttered open as we transferred her, found my face, and went wide with something I couldn't read. Fear maybe. Or recognition. Or both. Her lips moved. I didn't have time to hear it. There was a body in front of me that was failing. And for the next several minutes, that was all she was allowed to be. The rule. Here's something the dramas get wrong. A doctor is not supposed to treat her own family. There are good reasons for the rule. Your judgment bends around the people you love, or the people you don't. And a patient deserves a clear-eyed physician, not a daughter with 5 years of history in her hands. The medical ethics code is plain about it. We generally don't treat our own. But it carves out one exception. And I was standing inside it. In an emergency, when no other qualified physician is immediately available, you don't hesitate. You stabilize. You keep the person alive until you can hand them to someone whose hands aren't shaking with anything. Mine weren't shaking. But I knew the rule, and I knew myself. So I did the discipline thing out loud. "Page trauma surgery now. And get me the second attending." I told Renata. "This patient is my sister. I'll stabilize her. Then I'm stepping back." Renata's eyes flicked to mine for half a second. Just half. Then she nodded and made the calls. I noted the relationship in the chart. I did everything the way I'd have wanted any physician to do it for anyone I loved. Which, in that strange moment, Dana technically still was. People think revenge looks like withholding. It doesn't. The most powerful thing I did that night, before I'd said a single word to my parents, was follow the rules. Exactly. Because the rules were the one thing my family had never once given me. And I had become a person who lived by them. Working her. We worked her hard. 2 large bore IVs. Type and cross for 4 units. A fast exam that lit up with free fluid where free fluid should never be. Her belly was rigid. Her pressure was in the basement. And somewhere inside her, something was bleeding that needed an operating room. I ran it the way I run everything. In short, flat sentences that leave no room for panic. Pressure's dropping. Open the second line. Where's my surgeon? The trauma team materialized at the door, gowning up. Dana drifted in and out the way trauma patients do, surfacing on a wave of adrenaline and sinking again. On one of those surfacings, her eyes found mine over the mask, and they widened, and she started to cry, in the helpless way of someone half sedated and fully afraid. "Iris," she said, slurring. "Iris." Somebody had to tell them the truth. There it was. The line she'd carried for 5 years like a medal, falling out of her now, not as a weapon but as a confession, mumbled to the one person it had been used against, in a room where she couldn't have stopped it if she'd tried. I didn't flinch. I adjusted her oxygen and said, "Don't talk. Save your strength." My sister was finally telling the truth, and she was too far under to know she was doing it. I'd waited 5 years to hear her admit it. I heard it while I was keeping her alive. If you'd told me that's how it would happen, I wouldn't have believed you. Life doesn't hand you your moments wrapped the way you imagined them. It hands them to you mid-shift, glove to the wrist, with your own hands holding the line. The waiting room. While I worked, the front of the department was coming apart, in the way I'd seen 1,000 times from the other side. My parents had been called by the police, had driven the 40 minutes from their town, white-knuckled, and had come through the sliding doors at a run. I didn't see it. Renata told me after. My mother reached the desk first, breathless, gripping the counter. Our daughter. They brought in our daughter. Please. Where's the doctor in charge? My father stood behind her, gray-faced, useless with fear. They didn't know the doctor in charge. They couldn't have. I was masked and capped in a trauma bay 40 feet away, and the last picture they had of me was 5 years old, and entirely fictional. Renata, who is kinder than the job usually allows, took my mother gently by the elbow. The trauma team is with her now. The attending will come out to update you. Please wait in those chairs. And she pointed at the row of waiting room chairs along the wall, the molded plastic kind every hospital owns. My parents sat down in them. 2 chairs. My mother and father side by side, hands clenched, waiting for news from a doctor whose name they had spent 5 years scrubbing out of their lives. I think about the symmetry of it sometimes, and it still stops my breath. For 5 years, I'd stared at chairs they refused to sit in. Now they sat in a hospital's chairs, begging a stranger for mercy. And the stranger was the daughter they'd left those other chairs empty for. The pocket of quiet. We got Dana stable enough to move. Pressure responding. Lines in. Surgery ready upstairs. There's always a strange pocket of quiet right after the storm of a resuscitation. When the patient is packaged and the team exhales, and you peel off the outer gloves. I stood in that pocket and knew that just past the doors, in 2 plastic chairs, sat the people who'd told me to come home only when I was ashamed. They had no idea the door was about to open. They were about to learn who'd been keeping their daughter alive. I want you to sit in this with me for a second. Because if your stomach is in a knot right now, you understand this story in your bones. Picture being the one they erased. Walking out to face the people who erased you. Not to win. Not to gloat. But because it's literally your job to update the family. If you've ever rehearsed a confrontation for years, and then had it arrive on an ordinary Tuesday with no script, comment I felt this. And stay with me. And subscribe. Because what happens when that door opens is the whole reason I'm telling you any of this. The walk. I pulled off my gloves. I straightened my badge without thinking about it. The way you tuck in a shirt. And I walked toward the doors. The 2 people in the plastic chairs looked up, expecting a stranger. I could have sent someone else. That's the truth I sat with for the 3 steps it took to reach the doors. There were other people who could have walked out and said the words. She's stable. She's going to surgery. A resident. The second attending. Renata. I had every reason to hand it off and stay invisible. To spare myself the scene. To let my parents hear the good news from a face that meant nothing to them. I almost did. Then I realized that hiding would have been its own kind of performance. The abandoned daughter still managing the family's comfort. Still arranging her own absence so no one would feel awkward. I'd done that for 30 years. I was done. I wasn't going to walk out there to win. And I wasn't going to walk out there to hide. I was going to walk out there because a family was waiting for an update on a critical patient. And updating them was the job of the attending of record. And that was me. That's the whole thing about doing it right. You stop choosing your actions based on what they'll do to the people who hurt you. You just do the next correct thing calmly. And let the chips land where the truth puts them. So I didn't rehearse a line. I didn't fix my face into anything. I reached up and slid my mask down off my chin. The fluorescent hallway light caught the laminate of the badge clipped to my chest. And I pushed through the doors into the waiting room where my mother and father sat. The recognition. The waiting room was half empty and too bright. The way they always are at that hour. My mother was leaning forward in her plastic chair. Hands knotted. Eyes fixed on the doors. Ready to leap at whoever came through with news of her daughter. My father sat beside her. Smaller than I remembered. His shoulders curved in. I stopped a few feet in front of them. For a moment, they saw only a doctor. Green scrubs. A stethoscope. The badge catching the light. My mother started to rise. "Doctor, please. Our daughter Dana Bennett, is she?" And then she stopped. She stopped the way you stop when a familiar face surfaces in a crowd. When the brain runs ahead of the eyes and refuses the math. Then does it anyway. Her gaze had snagged on the badge. White letters under the hallway fluorescence. Clipped to the chest of the doctor in charge of her daughter's life. Iris, MD. Emergency Medicine. Assistant Medical Director. I watched her read it. I watched her read it again. I watched her eyes climb from the badge to my face, and finish the equation she'd spent 5 years insisting could never be true. The failure. The dropout. The shame. Standing in front of her in a doctor's coat. With her daughter's life in those steady hands. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. And beside her, my father's head came up slow. And his face did something I'll spend the rest of my life trying to describe. What I remember most is how quiet I stayed. I'd imagined this moment for 5 years. And in every version I said something. A speech. A list. The whole crime laid out. Standing there, I didn't want any of it. I had a job to do and a patient upstairs. And these two frightened people were, for the next few minutes, simply a family that needed an update. So I gave them one. In the same voice I'd use for any family. "Your daughter is stable. She has internal bleeding from the crash. We've controlled it for now, and the surgical team is taking her up to the operating room. She's in good hands." My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make. Her hand shot out and clamped onto my father's forearm, and her fingers dug in so hard that later, in the surgical waiting room, my Aunt Carol would notice the 4 little bruises blooming above his wrist and ask what happened. My mother grabbed my father's arm so hard it left bruises. "Iris," my mother whispered. "Iris, you're a..." She couldn't finish it. The word was doctor. And she couldn't say it. Because saying it meant the story had been a lie the whole time. And she'd built 5 years on it. My father said nothing. He stared at the badge like it was a thing that might disappear if he blinked. And me? I stayed level. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell them what they'd cost me. The power in that room had inverted completely. And I held it the way I hold everything in my department. With 2 hands and no drama. Because I'd learned a long time ago that the calmest person in the room is the one who's actually in charge. They were unraveling. I was steady. That was the entire revenge. And I didn't have to lift a finger to take it. The doorway. The shock lasted about 10 seconds. And then my mother did what my mother does. She reached for a version of events she could survive. "We didn't know," she said, the words tumbling. "Iris, we didn't know. Dana told us. Dana said you dropped out. She said you were in trouble. What were we supposed to think?" There it was. Inside 30 seconds of learning the truth, she'd already found the doorway out of her own responsibility. And the doorway was Dana. Then the weather. Then the world. "You went quiet," she said, voice rising. "You stopped calling. What were we supposed to think?" She was crying now. But it was the crying that asks you to comfort the person who hurt you. And I knew it the way you know a song you hate. My father, beside her, said it then. Said it low, almost to himself. The exact words he'd ended me with 5 years before. "We just wanted you to come home." It wasn't the same sentence. But it lived in the same house as the old one. The one about shame. And it hung in the air between us. I looked at him. And I looked at my mother, reaching for my hands. And I took one small step back out of her reach. And I said the only true thing I had. I was never the one who needed to be ashamed. I didn't say it cruel. I said it the way you state a vital sign. Calm. Final. A fact, not a wound. My mother's hands closed on empty air. And she looked at them like she couldn't understand why they were empty. And I understood, with a clarity that surprised me, that they'd been closing on empty air where I was concerned for 30 years. The handoff. I had a department to run and a sister in an operating room. And I wasn't going to spend the night being processed by the people who'd thrown me out. So I did the discipline thing. The same thing I'd started doing the moment I recognized Dana on the gurney. "I want to be clear about something," I said. I stabilized your daughter because I was the physician on duty and it was an emergency. Now that she's stable, I'm handing her care to the trauma team and the second attending. I won't be her doctor going forward." My mother stared. "But you're in charge. You could." "I could," I said. "And I'm not going to. Because she deserves a doctor who isn't standing in the middle of all this. That's how it's supposed to work." It landed on them slowly, what I was telling them. That I would not use my power for them or against them. That I would simply do the right thing. And step out of it. And then I told them where to go. And I chose the words on purpose. And they came out as level as everything else. "You can have the chairs," I said, nodding toward the surgical waiting room down the hall. "Someone will come find you when there's news." The chairs. 5 years of empty seats they'd refused to fill. And now I was the one assigning them a place to sit and wait. I didn't say it to wound. I said it because it was simply, finally true. "I'm her doctor for about 10 more minutes," I said. "After that, I'm just the daughter you decided you didn't have. Excuse me." And I turned to go check on my patient. My father's voice. I'd taken 2 steps when my father spoke. "Iris." Just my name. I stopped. And I turned. Because 34 years of training to that voice doesn't vanish in a hallway. He was standing now. And his hand was shaking. And his eyes had gone red and wet in a way I'd never once seen as a kid. He'd been a flat, final man my whole life. A man who delivered verdicts and went silent. Now he looked like the floor had opened. "Iris," he said again. And that was all he had. No defense. No version. Just my name. Said like it still belonged to him. Like he was reaching for a thing he'd thrown away and found his hands too small to hold it. And I'll be honest with you. Because this channel is for honesty. Something in me cracked just a little. Looking at him. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the recognition that he was a person. A weak and frightened person who had let his wife and his favorite daughter steer him into the worst mistake of his life. And who was only now, with one of his children bleeding upstairs, beginning to understand the size of it. I didn't soften the boundary. I didn't take it back. But I gave him one small thing. Because I could afford to. And he couldn't. I gave him a nod. Just a nod. Small. Even. Enough to tell him I'd heard my name. My dad said my name like it still belonged to him. It didn't. But I let him keep the sound of it. Then I turned and went back through the doors to the only family in that building who'd ever needed me to be exactly who I am. Afterward, Dana came through surgery. A splenectomy. Some repair work. A long night for the team upstairs. But she lived. I checked the board updates the way I'd check on any patient. From a professional distance. And when I saw stable post-op, I let out a breath I hadn't told anyone I was holding. I stood in the hallway afterward. In the strange, flat calm that follows a long save. And I thought about all of it at once. The kitchen table. The empty chairs. The dean's letter no one read. The sticky note on the mirror. The badge in the cardboard envelope. 30 years of being the one who managed. Who fixed. Who carried. I just carried my own sister through the door of her worst night. And then set the weight down exactly where the rules said to set it. I didn't pick it back up. And then, the way the job always reminds you. The world kept spinning. The overhead crackled and said, "Dr. Bennett, Bay 4. New patient. Different emergency." My name called out plain across the department my family had spent 5 years pretending I never reached. I started walking toward Bay 4. And somewhere down the hall, my parents sat in the chairs I'd sent them to. And they heard it too. My name. Said by a hospital. With the title they couldn't say themselves. I didn't look back to see their faces. I didn't need to. I had a patient waiting and a life that fit me and a name that finally got called in all the rooms where I used to get left out. That's the thing nobody warns the people who throw you away. You don't disappear. You just get paged somewhere that wanted you. The texts. Dana texted me from her hospital bed 2 days later. A long message. I read it once. Half of it was apology. And half of it was the old machinery. I was scared. I never meant. You have to understand the position I was in. Even flat on her back with a fresh scar. She was still managing the story. Still arranging herself as the one who'd had no choice. I noticed she never once wrote the word lie. I didn't write back a paragraph. I wrote, "I'm glad you're going to be okay. I mean that." And I left it there. Because it was true. And because I no longer needed her to confess for me to know what I knew. My mother called 11 times over the next week. I let them go to voicemail. Then I sent one message to both my parents. I'm not closing the door for good. But if there's ever a relationship again, it starts with the truth out loud. All of it. And not with you needing something from me. Until then, I wish you well. The truth. I thought about Dana's old line. The one she'd carried like a medal and then mumbled, half sedated, in my trauma bay. Somebody in this family had to tell them the truth. She'd been wrong about everything except that sentence. Somebody did have to. It just turned out the truth didn't need a messenger after all. It walked into a waiting room on its own 2 feet, wearing a badge, and said, "Your daughter is stable." And everyone in the room finally saw it. I didn't have to send a single screenshot. I just had to become someone they couldn't unsee. The chairs. I still think about those 2 empty chairs sometimes. The ones at the white coat ceremony. With my parents' names on folded cards that I drove out at dawn to set. For years, I thought of them as the measure of something missing in me. Proof of a seat I couldn't get filled. I don't see them that way anymore. Those chairs were never empty because of anything I lacked. They were empty because 2 people chose again and again not to sit down in my life. That was their choice to make. And their loss to carry. The night Dana crashed, the chairs finally got filled. By the same 2 people. In a hospital hallway. Waiting on the daughter they'd left the seats empty for. Some symmetries you couldn't write. You can only live long enough to watch them close. What I learned. Here's what 5 years of silence taught me. You don't owe your worth to the people who profited from doubting it. You just keep quietly becoming the person they'll one day need. And you let the truth do its own walking. In its own time. Through whatever door it chooses. That's my story. 1 lie. 2 empty chairs. And a badge that finally said my name out loud. If someone ever rewrote your story to make themselves the hero, take this as your sign. Keep building quietly. And let the truth walk in on its own. If this reached you, send it to someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.